Hello, everyone. I want to first welcome those of you who are new to the channel. My name is Alfred Cromwell, and I am the founder and president of a tutoring academy called City Tutoring. And I am located in Lynchburg, Virginia. And the second thing I wanted to say is that I feel I have no words to describe the how humble I feel towards those of you who have recently sent me gifts and even I even had some people show some financial support to the mission of City Tutoring. Just know that I am deeply humbled, and that I do. It makes me think so hard about the random acts of kindness that human beings can show towards one another, and the how important it is to value truth. So if you sent me something recently, please know that I am very, very grateful. I am here at your service. Please always feel free to email us, and I will do my best to take care of whatever needs you have in the mathematical sense, if you have those needs. But today's video is about why I said no to the art of problem solving, otherwise known as AOPS. And it is an unfortunate tendency of the age that we are living in that education used to be it was once the domain of quiet deliberation and dignified thought, but it has been surrendered in no small part to a spirit of spectacle we have these days. And in many quarters, the teaching of mathematics has devolved into a performance with success that is measured not by clarity of conception, nor by logical exactitude, but by the nimbleness of a pupil's wit under artificial constraints. And I have recently made, and I will link it down in the description, I recently actually made an examination of the art of problem solving. I reviewed what they're about. And it does appear to enjoy the series it enjoys great favor amongst the more, we'll say, precocious of today's American youth. Um, the volumes, there are several volumes, they purport to instill mathematical proficiency not by systematic exposition, but by a parade of challenging puzzles, contrived problems, and heuristic devices. But I am of a different school of thought. And there's a surprise in this video that is shocking. It's going to shock you. At the end of the video, I will mention what happened. And but I am of an older school, not because of my age, but because of the way I see things. They used to call this your worldview, and I was reared in a very different mindset than. And I don't say this out of pride. I say this as an explanation to kind of understand the context of why I do the things I do. It's not about pride. It's about knowing that you are grounded in a different sort of intellectual tradition and mental framework. So we have to discuss first the nature of mathematical instruction, because the task of mathematical education, rightly understood, is not to dazzle, but to discipline. It's not to elicit cleverness necessarily, as good as that is, but it's really to inculcate form. It is the glory of mathematics that it proceeds not by guesswork, but by necessity, not by expedience, but by proof. So any pedagogy that treats the subject as a collection of riddles is, in essence, mistaking the scaffolding for the evidence, for the edifice. And the authors of AOPS, to their credit, they show no want of cleverness themselves. And you can tell in their writings, in their books, that they do have a sincere enthusiasm for the subject. But the books exhibit an impatience for the more rigorous formalism that must, in the end, support all higher mathematics. I already mentioned the fact in the previous video about AOPS that set theory is scarcely mentioned. The notion of a number is assumed rather than interrogated. Axioms are introduced more by convenience than by construction. They do mention the set of irrational numbers, but not in the formalist, logical, deductive way that we defend at City Tutoring. Now, you could forgive those omissions in a text that is for beginners. You could forgive that, were it not for the fact that these AOPS, the books are designed not so much for the beginner as for, according to they themselves, the gifted student, the gifted amateur, perhaps, who is encouraged to vault over conceptual clarity in pursuit of ever more. The book gets progressively harder in terms of the challenges as you go along. But we have to discuss now the Math Olympics because nowhere is this tendency more manifest than in the books. They are devoted to what is called Olympiad mathematics. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a species of problem solving competition. That's why they call themselves the art of problem solving, which seems to excite, it does excite certain amount of national fervor among the mathematically inclined. But I have to confess, I find this modern idolatry curious. It is as if geometry were valued less for the insight it affords into spatial structure and more for the capacity to furnish a clever answer under the pressure of a ticking clock. I mean, the very phrase Olympiad problem suggests to me a gladiatorial ethos that is alien to the traditions of mathematical inquiry. It rewards the swift rather than the sound. It favors the solver who leaps to a good solution, a clever solution, rather than the one who builds methodically upon established truths. For I cannot imagine Gauss, nor indeed coaching, subjecting themselves to such theatrics. Or as Euclid himself once said, there is no royal road to geometry. The great object of education is not the acquisition of knowledge merely, but the formation of a noble character. All exercises, whether bodily or mental, must have this as their ultimate end. But if we are to elevate the mind, and not merely to entertain it, we must return to the virtues of structure. The proper aim of instruction for our young people is to lay down those firm foundations upon which all later architecture must rest: the logic of the integers, the relations of sets and functions, the properties of operations under composition and inversion, etc., etc. And to this end, I lament the absence of even a cursory engagement with set theoretic thinking in the art of problem solving volumes. It's not enough to speak of even numbers and factors without clarifying deeply what is meant by a number, what constitutes a property, and by what principles such properties may be predicated. There is an old truth in pedagogy, and one which the modern authors would do well to heed. And if you're from AOPS and you're watching, this is a direct admonition. What is understood in haste is forgotten in silence. So, one of the more subtle failings of the modern mathematical textbooks in general, AOPS included, you have a certain untidiness of exposition, especially with regard to notation. Now, I don't mean that the symbols themselves are obscure, rather, that they are often introduced in haste, without the requisite solemnity or justification, and employed in a fashion more playful than precise. It used to be the custom, indeed the intellectual duty, of a writer to proceed with a sense of rhetorical order. That's why in the past you had courses called logic and rhetoric. You had a sense of rhetorical order. Definitions were followed by examples, then by theorems, and finally by proof. Notation was adopted only when it could be made to serve such a structure. And it was judged not only by its utility, but by its capacity to illuminate the underlying ideas. It was never, as it too often is now, a cipher hurled at the pupil like a projectile from the chalkboard. The current method that is found in these volumes is to we really get inundated. The reader is inundated with an armory of notational gadgets, floor functions. They will use sigma summations, set builder, but they don't even use set builder notation, by the way, in none of the AOPS books. And but all the stuff is delivered in quick succession and often in the margin of a problem, rather than in the stately procession of a formal development. So you come away with the feeling not of having read a mathematical treatise, but of having overheard, maybe in the best case scenario, a mathematician thinking aloud in shorthand. So what is gained in immediacy is lost, alas, in elegance. And what is worse, the student is taught to solve before he's taught to speak. And now we have to talk about the role of abstraction and why the Euclidean method endures. It's a point scarcely requiring defense among the learned here, though it's increasing, well, it's already unfashionable among so-called educators who are not really educators at all. They are, all they do is spread the whatever corporate approved or government approved propaganda of the day. But abstraction is not an impediment to understanding, it is the precondition. When the mind is made to engage with the general, the particular becomes intelligible as an instance, not as an accident. In fact, in today's society, we are actually taught by many people the opposite. We are told not to generalize because that obeys the politically correct idea. But of course, you have to generalize. Generalization is about not just survival, but thinking properly. The child who grasps the group law doesn't tremble before a table of multiplication facts. He comprehends them as the inevitable expression of a deeper order. And the art of problem solving volumes, for all their ingenuity, they seem curiously reluctant to ascend this ladder. They gesture toward abstraction, they flirt with it, no doubt, but they do not inhabit it. One sees little in the way of structured definitions and still less of axiomatic systems. The language of equivalence, implication, and mutual necessity is employed loosely. Almost, if they almost do it conversationally. Now you have to contrast that with the method of Euclid, where you have propositions, however elementary by modern standards, and they retain an austere beauty precisely because they unfold from self-evident principles through unimpeachable logic. And it is this Euclidean spirit that is methodical, hierarchical, and impersonal in a way that the modern curriculum so often neglects in its enthusiasm to engage the student. That's the obsession now. We have to engage the student. And thus, the young reader might become skilled in tactics and yet remain a stranger to theory. He may succeed in a competition but flounder in contemplation. You know this for a fact. In fact, a lot of my Asian students, I have Asian students, you're watching, if you come from an Asian country, you know exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of you succeed in competitions. You're clever at manipulating the certain algorithms, certain processes, but you're not known, you're not taught to contemplate in silence. That's a fact. Not that Americans contemplate in silence, but we used to have, at least in the Western tradition, we used to have that. So, what does the art of problem solving, if we look at it as a cultural document, what does it reveal of the present age we are living in? So, I have hitherto treated the AOPS as a mathematical text, but it must also be understood as a cultural document and read accordingly. But what does it reveal? So, on the one hand, we can see that it is, in a way, animated by the spirit of American, what they used to call, and some still do, American exceptionalism. It is restless, it is ambitious, it's an ambitious project, it's entrepreneurial, no doubt. And it seeks not so much to educate the masses as to identify and accelerate the few. So, in this, they are admirably honest. Uh, the books are not democratic, and they don't pretend that they are. They do not lower themselves to the indifferent, but rather they assume an audience already captivated, and they aim to fan the flame into glory. But when you have this clarity of purpose, it comes a certain cultural pathology. There is an emphasis on cleverness. Every exercise, if you look at the AOPS, is sort of tricky, not tricky, but um, let's just say more riddle-like than the last one. Every chapter is a gauntlet. Every solution a performance. It is very nice, but there is little repose. There's no philosophical musing. There's no pause to inquire into the meaning of mathematics as a human activity. So, in a way, math in the AOPS is war. And now I'm no pacifist, but I don't see math in those terms. It really reflects the temperament of the present age. It's frenetic, self promotional, and it's really impatient when it comes to slower thinking. You yearn sometimes for a passage rather of humility, a moment when the author can confess that not all problems are meant to be solved swiftly. Not all questions have a finality, but you don't really see that in AOPS. It is brilliant in if you are interested in competition, yes, but it's breathless. Now, in the 19th century, and even to the present day at places like city tutoring, the student of mathematics was initiated by degrees. Much as one is today, if that's still around, I'm not sure, but if you think of the idea of a brotherhood, that's how it began. You began with arithmetic, not merely computational, but theoretical. Pick up an arithmetic book from the 19th century and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. If you proceeded through you proceeded through Euclid or Legendre, you encountered algebra in the form of equation solving, and you had symbolic manipulation as well, but that was only gradually. You were later on gradually introduced to number theory, combinatorics, or higher analysis. So the order was not arbitrary. It wasn't dull either. It reflected the conviction that mathematics was to be formed in the mind, not merely impressed upon it. So the cultivation of habit and disposition preceded the engagement with novelty. And by contrast, art of problem solving reverses the order. It begins with the dazzling, the difficult, the exceptional. Uh, it really treats mathematics as a hunt rather than a system. And that bothers me. There is some virtue in that, um, but the method is, I find it very volatile. Because if you do not have a framework, then your brilliance becomes brittle. Most of the problems we have in Western countries today have to do with the fact that there is no longer a sense of unifying, unyielding truth. That's why there is no political unity. That is why there is no spiritual unity. That is why social relationships have broken down. In order for a society to be a civilization and thrive and not be threatened by foreign enemies, literally, you have to have a very deep sense of yourself and a strong spiritual convictions. That's why I've said many times, no, none. If you look around today, the revolution is not going to come from Western societies. You cannot expect a revolution from people who go around, going out with their little dog, wearing flip flops. I always say that. Just look at the average person today, what they do, how they think, their activities, and you cannot expect any major revolution. Certainly not the kind of revolutions that we need. But in the older text, by the way, you did not encounter the phrase challenge problem. All problems were serious. None required the sanction of flair. So bear with me because I'm getting to the main point. I don't want anybody to think that I think that the art of problem solving is some kind of failure or that you shouldn't buy it. Quite the contrary. Um, it succeeds on its own terms extraordinarily well. But it is precisely its success that renders it susceptible to criticism because it exerts an outsized influence on the young minds who pass through its pages. There's a lot of people who want to take math seriously, but they look to AOPS. They do not look to the method that we have at City Tutoring, for example, because they don't know about it, obviously. Obviously, we're not as well known as AOPS. But believe me, we have the right kind of thinking. And I don't say that because I'm promoting City Tutoring. I am saying because I challenge anyone watching this video to look up any tutoring agency in America, look up any math academy in America that teaches the with the approach that we take. No, there it doesn't exist because we are looking for the right kind of people. We're not just looking to fill up desks and registration. We want the right. We want people who are committed to a specific kind of thinking, and it is for their sake that I make my final appeal. Mathematics is not merely a tool, it's not a game, it's not a means to university admission. Mathematics is a form of life. It is to study mathematics is to submit yourself to order, to God's truths, to train the soul in patience and precision, to adopt a standard of internal coherence for higher than what is demanded by the world outside. The ideal mathematician of old, whether he lectured at Cambridge in Germany or in the École Normale in France, was first and foremost a gentleman of reason. He spoke modestly, he wrote carefully, and he pursued truth without vanity. He didn't compete, he constructed. A true mathematical student must construct. So we have to teach our young people not merely how to solve problems, but how to become those ideal gentlemen and ladies too of the past. So if you've listened patiently to my meditations here, I offer you my thanks because I want you to continue in your studies. And here is what I wanted to tell you. So you didn't know this about me, but several years ago, the art of problem solving actually, I interviewed with the art of problem solving many years ago, and I almost worked for them. But because of the things that I just told you, I decided no. I decided no. It is not for me because as I also told you, I shy away from working for others as well, but especially those that do not share my vision of what mathematical education should be. And that's when I decided to start City Tutoring. Thank you all. I hope that these reflections were of benefit to you. And if they were, and if you agree with them, please subscribe to the channel and continue to support us grow. We're growing to unprecedented levels. Thank you all.